The scream that should have come never did. 6-year-old Matilda Corleone stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, her tiny fists clenched around the iron railing, watching the ambulance lights paint her father's face red and blue through the mansion's towering windows. Her mother's body was being loaded into the vehicle, and the child's mouth opened, stretched wide in what should have been a wail of agony, but no sound emerged. Not a whimper. Not a breath. Just silence so thick it seemed to swallow the entire estate whole. That was 3 years ago, and the silence never left. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. Or if you're new here, welcome to a story that's going to shake you to your core. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Are you cozy at home, on your lunch break, or maybe listening while you work? And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do me a favor and tap it now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this story. This one's going to stay with you long after it ends. Now let me take you into the world of billionaire industrialist Theodore Corleone. A man who had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most, his daughter's voice. The Corleone mansion sprawled across 15 acres of manicured gardens and marble fountains, but inside, it felt like a mausoleum. Theodore had hired 17 specialists, speech therapists, psychologists, neurologists, each more expensive than the last. They'd poked and prodded little Matilda with their tests and their theories. Selective mutism, they said. Trauma-induced aphonia. Psychological shutdown. None of them could make her speak. Theodore would sit in his study every night, surrounded by photos of his late wife, Victoria, and listen to the oppressive quiet that had replaced his daughter's laughter. The staff whispered in corners, careful not to make too much noise, as if sound itself had become offensive in a house where the most important voice had been stolen. Matilda moved through the mansion like a ghost child, beautiful, fragile, and utterly unreachable. Her large hazel eyes held oceans of pain that no 9-year-old should carry. She'd nod or shake her head when asked questions, sometimes write on a small whiteboard the nanny carried, but mostly she just existed in her bubble of silence, clutching a faded pink blanket that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. The household staff changed regularly. Nannies couldn't handle the pressure of caring for a child who wouldn't speak. Housekeepers grew uncomfortable with the heaviness that hung in every room. Even Theodore's own family had stopped visiting, unable to bear the reminder of what they'd all lost that terrible night when Victoria's car skidded off the bridge. But everything was about to change. On a humid Tuesday morning, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, brought in a new maid for the evening shift. Her name was Josephine Goodcat, Jo to those who knew her, and she was nothing like the polished, stiff professionals who usually staffed the Corleone estate. Jo was a woman in her early 30s with warm brown skin, kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled, and an easy laugh that seemed to challenge the mansion's oppressive silence from the moment she walked through the servants' entrance. She carried only a small duffel bag and wore a simple yellow dress that somehow brought color into the gray monotony of the estate. "She's not like the others, Mr. Corleone," Mrs. Chin warned Theodore during the brief introduction in his study. "She's unceremonious. But she has excellent references, and frankly, sir, we're running out of options. No one wants to work here anymore." Theodore barely looked up from his laptop. "Fine. Just keep her away from Matilda. The child doesn't need another stranger trying to fix her." But fate, as it often does, had other plans. That very evening, as Jo was shown to her quarters in the West Wing, she passed by Matilda's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see the small girl sitting by her window, staring out at the darkening sky with such profound loneliness that Jo's heart cracked right open. Jo didn't announce herself, didn't force her presence. She simply continued down the hallway, thinking about the silent child with the sad eyes. Later that night, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar room, Jo decided to explore the estate grounds. That's when she saw it, tucked behind the garden shed, half buried in a pile of items marked for disposal. An ornate music box, tarnished and dusty, but still beautiful beneath the grime. Jo picked it up, brushing off years of neglect. The metal was cold in her hands, engraved with delicate roses and vines. Something about it called to her, whispered secrets she couldn't yet understand. She turned the small key on the bottom, and the mechanism creaked to life, playing a haunting, beautiful melody that seemed to drift through the night air like a ghost searching for home. She didn't know it yet, but that music box had belonged to Victoria Corleone. It had been thrown away months after her death by Theodore's cold, calculating sister, Aunt Beatrice, who declared it morbid clutter, and demanded the estate be purged of Victoria's sentimental nonsense. And she certainly didn't know that inside Matilda's bedroom, 3 floors above, the little girl's head had snapped toward her window at the sound of that melody, a tune she hadn't heard since the night her mother sang her to sleep for the very last time. Matilda pressed her small hands against the glass, her lips moving soundlessly, forming a word that refused to come, Mama. What Joe had stumbled upon wasn't just a music box. It was a key, to a little girl's voice, to a broken man's heart, and to a mystery that would unravel everything the Corleone household thought they knew about the night Victoria died. But in the shadows of the estate, someone else had noticed Joe's arrival. Someone who had secrets buried deep in this mansion's foundation. Someone who would do anything, absolutely anything, to make sure those secrets stayed hidden. Josephine Goodcat had learned early in life that survival meant staying invisible. Growing up in the foster system, bouncing between homes that ranged from indifferent to cruel, she'd mastered the art of being useful without being noticed. But there was one thing Joe could never suppress: her voice. She sang. Constantly. While cleaning, while cooking, while walking down streets. Old gospel hymns her grandmother had taught her before she passed, jazz standards, lullabies, pop songs. Music poured out of Joe like sunlight, warm and unavoidable. It had gotten her kicked out of 2 foster homes. Too loud, too happy, too much. But it had also saved her life more times than she could count. Music was the only language that made sense when words failed. Now, as she scrubbed floors in the Corleone mansion's endless hallways, Joe hummed softly to herself, the music box tucked safely in her apron pocket. She'd cleaned it the night before, polishing away years of neglect until the silver gleamed and the rose engravings caught the light like secrets ready to be told. "The new girl sings," muttered Bernard Capone, the head butler, a reed-thin man with disapproving eyes who'd served the Corleone family for 23 years. "Most inappropriate. This is a house of mourning, not a concert hall." Mrs. Chun, arranging flowers in the main foyer, smiled secretly. "Maybe that's exactly what this house needs, Bernard. A little life." "Life?" Bernard's voice dripped with disdain. "Mr. Corleone has made it abundantly clear that his daughter's condition requires quiet and calm. That woman's humming will only agitate the child." But Bernard was wrong. Because at that very moment, 3 floors above, Matilda Corleone was doing something she hadn't done in 3 years. She was actively searching for something. The little girl had abandoned her usual spot by the window and was systematically checking every room on her floor, opening doors with purpose, her ears straining for that melody she'd heard the night before. The melody that tasted like birthday cake and felt like her mother's hands braiding her hair and sounded like safety. Where was it coming from? Theodore Corleone noticed his daughter's unusual behavior during his brief morning visit to her rooms. Matilda was typically so still, so passive, but today she was animated, still silent, but moving with intent. "Matilda? What are you looking for, sweetheart?" Theodore knelt beside her, his voice gentle but strained. Even after 3 years, he still didn't know how to talk to this quiet stranger who wore his daughter's face. Matilda looked at him with those devastating hazel eyes and did something that made Theodore's breath catch. She brought her small hands to her ears and then moved them in a circular motion. She was trying to tell him something about music. "Music? You want to listen to music?" Theodore felt his throat tighten. They hadn't played music in the house since Victoria's death. His late wife had been a pianist, had filled their home with Chopin and Debussy and impromptu concerts where she'd sing Broadway songs while making dinner. After she died, Theodore had ordered every piano in the house covered, every radio removed. Music hurt too much. Matilda nodded frantically, then pointed toward the window, then down, gesturing toward the lower floors. "I don't understand, baby." "I'm sorry, I don't." Theodore's frustration leaked into his voice, and immediately Matilda's animation died. She retreated back into herself, that terrible blank expression sliding over her features like a mask. Theodore stood, running his hands through his graying hair. He was 42 years old, ran a company worth billions, commanded boardrooms and negotiations with ease. But he couldn't reach his own daughter. The guilt was drowning him slowly, one silent day at a time. If you're feeling this story in your soul, drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever lost someone and felt like you lost yourself too? You're not alone, friend. And don't forget to subscribe. This story's about to get even deeper. In the kitchen, Joe was learning the complicated hierarchy of the Corleone household. Mrs. Chin was kind but overworked. Bernard was suspicious of everyone. The cook, a fierce woman named Dolores, ruled her domain with an iron spatula, and seemed to respect Joe's willingness to help without being asked. But it was Theodore's sister, Beatrice Hawthorne, who truly ran the show. Beatrice arrived that afternoon in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely concealed contempt. She was a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s, dressed in a severe black suit that matched her personality. She'd moved into the estate after Victoria's death, ostensibly to help Theodore through his grief, but really to position herself as the power behind the Corleone throne. Who authorized the hiring of new staff? Beatrice demanded, cornering Mrs. Chun in the hallway. Mr. Corleone did, ma'am. We've been understaffed for months. I manage the household, Mrs. Chun. All hiring decisions go through me. Beatrice's eyes were cold. Where is this new maid? Joe was in the library, dusting shelves and humming softly, when Beatrice found her. You, Beatrice said, her voice like ice cracking. What's that noise you're making? Joe turned, giving Beatrice her warmest smile. Just humming, ma'am. Helps the work go faster. I can stop if it bothers you. It does. This household values quiet and order. If you can't manage that, you won't last here. Beatrice's gaze swept over Joe with unconcealed disdain. And what's that in your pocket? Joe's hand instinctively went to her apron, where the music box created a small bulge. Just a trinket I found, ma'am. Was going to ask if anyone wanted it before I. Let me see it. Beatrice's voice was sharp with sudden alarm. Joe pulled out the music box, and the blood drained from Beatrice's face so quickly she swayed on her heels. Where did you get that? Beatrice whispered, her composure cracking for just a moment. The refuse pile, ma'am. Behind the garden shed. It's beautiful, so I cleaned it up. Does it belong to someone? Beatrice's hand shot out and snatched the music box from Joe's hands with such violence that Joe stumbled backward. This is none of your concern. It should have been destroyed. You had no right. She cut herself off, collecting her composure like armor. You're dismissed. Pack your things. You're fired. But I just started. Effective immediately. Mrs. Chun will provide your wages. Leave the estate by sundown. Beatrice clutched the music box against her chest and swept from the room, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Joe stood in the library, stunned. What had just happened? Why would a music box provoke such a violent reaction? But in the hallway, pressed against the wall where no one could see her, Matilda had watched the entire exchange. And for the first time in 3 years, the little girl felt something stronger than sadness. She felt anger. That music box was her mother's. She remembered it. The melody that played when Mama opened it before bedtime, the way the tiny ballerina spun inside, the sweet lullaby that meant safety and love and home. Aunt Beatrice had no right to take it. And she had no right to send away the lady who sang. The lady whose voice reminded Matilda of everything good she'd lost. Matilda might not be able to speak, but she could act. That night, the household would learn that a silent child could make the loudest statement of all. Matilda waited until the house fell into its usual evening quiet, that suffocating silence that had become normal since her mother died. She knew the routines now. Father locked himself in his study until midnight, drowning in work and whiskey. Aunt Beatrice retired to the West Wing to watch her programs and make her phone calls to people she thought were more important than family. The staff finished their duties and retreated to their quarters. Everyone assumed the mute little girl would be asleep in her bed, where she was supposed to be. But Matilda was done being good. She slipped out of her room in her nightgown, bare feet silent on the cold marble, and made her way through the darkened mansion with purpose. She'd lived here her whole life, knew every shortcut, every creaky floorboard to avoid, every shadow where she could hide if someone came looking. She found Aunt Beatrice's suite and carefully tested the door handle. Locked. But Matilda wasn't deterred. Her mother had once shown her a secret. The balcony doors in this wing didn't lock properly. Too old, Victoria had laughed. This house has more secrets than security. Matilda slipped outside, the autumn air biting through her thin nightgown, and carefully made her way along the balcony until she reached Aunt Beatrice's room. The French doors were closed but not latched. Inside, she could hear the sound of running water. Beatrice was in the bathroom. Perfect. Matilda pushed open the door and slipped inside. The room smelled like Beatrice, sharp perfume and something bitter underneath. And there, on the dresser, was the music box. Matilda grabbed it, clutching it against her chest like treasure, and turned to leave. And found herself face to face with Josephine, who stood in the bedroom doorway with a mop and bucket, frozen in shock. For a long moment neither moved. Joe should have raised the alarm, should have called for help, should have done 100 things that would have been proper and right. Instead, she looked at the small girl holding the music box with such desperate determination, and something clicked into place in Joe's heart. "That's yours, baby?" Joe whispered. Matilda nodded, fierce and certain. "Then let's get you back to bed before anyone knows you were here." Joe set down her cleaning supplies and took Matilda's small hand in hers. The child didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers squeezed Joe's with surprising strength. A thank you, a plea, a connection that neither of them expected but both desperately needed. They made it back to Matilda's room without being seen, and Joe tucked the little girl into bed, the music box clutched in her small arms like a shield. "I'm supposed to be gone by now," Joe said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your aunt fired me, but I couldn't leave without making sure you were okay. Something about you," she paused, searching for words. "You remind me of myself at your age. So much locked inside with nowhere for it to go." Matilda stared at her with those two old eyes, and Joe saw something shift in them. A question, maybe. Or hope. "Can I show you something?" Joe asked. When Matilda nodded, Joe carefully took the music box and wound the key. The melody filled the room, sweet and aching and familiar, and Joe began to hum along, then sing softly. "Hush now, my darling. The stars are above, the moon watches over with silver and love. Tomorrow brings sunshine and laughter and play. But now close your eyes, let me sing you away." Matilda's eyes went wide. Her mother used to sing those words. Those exact words. How did this stranger know? "My grandmother taught me that lullaby," Joe said, seeing the recognition in Matilda's face. "Said it had been in our family for generations. Funny how songs travel through time like that, connecting people who never met." Matilda's hands moved frantically, and Joe watched as the child grabbed a pad and marker from her nightstand and wrote in careful letters, "My mama sang that." "Did she?" Joe's voice was gentle. "Then your mama had good taste. And she loved you very much if she sang you to sleep every night." "Yes," Matilda wrote, and then, with hands that trembled slightly, she died. "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Joe reached out slowly, giving Matilda time to pull away if she wanted, and stroked her hair. "I lost my mama too when I was little. Lost everyone, actually. Grew up in foster homes, bouncing around like a rubber ball nobody wanted to keep. So I get it. That hole inside that doesn't ever really fill up." Matilda's eyes filled with tears, and suddenly she was clutching Joe's hand with both of hers, holding on like a lifeline. "But you know what helped me?" Joe continued. "Music. Songs. Whenever I felt lost or scared or alone, I'd sing. And for a little while, I'd feel less broken. The music couldn't bring anyone back, but it reminded me that beautiful things still existed in the world. That I could still feel something besides pain." Matilda wrote again, her letters messier now through the tears. "I can't talk anymore. I know, but maybe you will again someday. And until then, I hear you just fine." Joe squeezed her hand. "Loud and clear, baby girl." That's when they heard the voice, low, shocked, breaking with emotion, from the doorway. "Matilda?" Theodore stood there in his shirt sleeves, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Because in all these years, he'd never seen his daughter cry. She'd been stone, ice untouchable. But now tears streamed down her face while she clutched a stranger's hand, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs that finally let out some of the grief she'd been holding. Who are you?" Theodore stepped into the room, his eyes moving between Joe and his daughter. "What's happening here?" Joe stood immediately, professional distance snapping into place. "I'm sorry, Mr. Corleone. I was just leaving. Your sister fired me this afternoon, but I couldn't leave without." She gestured helplessly at Matilda. She took her mother's music box back from Ms. Hawthorne's room. "I helped her get to bed without being caught. I'm sorry. I'll go now." "Wait." Theodore's voice was sharp with command, but his eyes were still on his daughter. His daughter who was feeling something, expressing emotion for the first time in 3 years. "The music box. That was Victoria's. I thought it had been. Beatrice told me it was sold. It was in the refuse pile, sir. I found it, cleaned it up. When your sister saw it, she seemed—" Joe paused, choosing her words carefully. "Upset. She took it from me and sent me away." Theodore's jaw tightened. Beatrice. Always managing, always controlling, always deciding what he and Matilda needed without asking. She'd probably thrown out Victoria's things thinking she was helping him move on. The rage that rose in his chest was immediate and white-hot. But then Matilda did something that stopped everyone cold. She let go of Joe's hand and walked to her father. Slowly, deliberately, she held up the music box, offering it to him like a bridge across 3 years of silence and separation. Theodore took it with shaking hands, wound the key, and let the melody play. The sound filled the room like Victoria's ghost coming home, and Theodore's vision blurred with tears he'd refused to cry since the funeral. "Your mother loved this thing," he whispered to Matilda. "It was her grandmother's. From Russia, before the family came to America. She said the song was about hope. About believing that morning always comes, no matter how dark the night." Matilda nodded, then did something that broke Theodore completely. She wrapped her small arms around his waist and pressed her face against him, holding on tight. Theodore dropped to his knees and pulled his daughter close, and for the first time in 3 years they grieved together. Not in silence, but with Theodore's ragged sobs filling the space where Matilda's voice used to be. Joe backed toward the door, giving them privacy, but Theodore's voice stopped her. "Don't go." She turned, uncertain. Theodore looked at her over Matilda's head, this stranger who'd somehow broken through walls that an army of specialists couldn't crack. "Please. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, don't stop. I'll triple your salary. Quadruple it. I'll fire Beatrice if I have to. Just help me reach my daughter. If you're watching this and your heart is breaking in the best way, hit that like button for me. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been helped by a complete stranger who changed your life? Share your story. We're all in this together." Joe looked at the broken billionaire holding his silent daughter, at the music box playing its ancient melody, at the motherless child who'd held her hand like a lifeline. "I don't want your money, Mr. Corleone," Joe said quietly. "I want to help Matilda. If you'll let me, I'll stay. But I do this my way, with music and stories and patience. No more doctors poking at her. No more treating her like she's broken. She's not broken, she's just lost. And maybe together, we can help her find her way home." Theodore nodded, unable to speak. None of them noticed Beatrice standing in the hallway, listening to every word, her face twisted with an emotion that was part rage, part fear, and part something else entirely, something that looked almost like guilt. The music box continued to play, its melody weaving through the mansion like a spell, waking things that had been sleeping far too long. And in the darkness outside, watching the lit window from the garden below, a figure stood perfectly still, someone who recognized that melody, who knew exactly what that music box represented, and who would do anything to ensure its secrets stayed buried. The game had changed. The players were gathering. And the truth about the night Victoria Corleone died was about to surface in ways no one could have predicted. In the days that followed, the Corleone mansion transformed in subtle but undeniable ways. Joe moved into the room adjoining Matilda's, and her presence brought something the estate hadn't felt in years: warmth. She sang while folding laundry, hummed while preparing Matilda's breakfast, told stories while braiding the little girl's hair. Rambling tales about her grandmother's farm in Georgia, about the foster families both terrible and kind, about a stray dog she'd once hidden in a garage for 3 months before anyone found out. Matilda didn't speak, but she began to communicate. She'd tap Joe's arm when she wanted attention, point to things that interested her, write longer and longer notes on her ever-present whiteboard. The blank, shuttered expression that had terrified Theodore slowly gave way to something more alive. Curiosity, amusement, even occasional frustration when Joe would tease her gently. Theodore watched these small miracles from a distance, afraid to disturb whatever magic was happening, afraid that if he got too close he'd somehow break it. But he couldn't help being drawn into their orbit. He started taking his coffee in the breakfast room where Joe fed Matilda, just to hear Joe's stories. Started finishing work earlier, so he could see Matilda before bed. One evening, he walked past Matilda's room and heard Joe singing the lullaby from the music box, and he stood in the hallway with his hand on his heart, remembering Victoria singing those same words to their baby daughter. "She's good for her," Mrs. Chin said, finding Theodore there. "Miss Joe, she's good for both of you." Theodore nodded, not trusting his voice. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Beatrice had become increasingly hostile, finding fault with everything Joe did. The girl sang too loudly. She was too familiar with Matilda. She filled the child's head with inappropriate stories. She was overstepping her station as a maid. "She's not a maid," Theodore corrected one afternoon when Beatrice cornered him in his study. "She's Matilda's companion. Her caregiver. She's help, Theodore. You can't possibly be considering making this permanent." Beatrice's voice dripped with disdain. "The woman is completely unsuitable. No formal education, no credentials, no family background to speak of. She's helping my daughter. Theodore cut her off, his voice hard. That's the only credential I care about. And while we're on the subject, Beatrice, why did you throw away Victoria's music box? You told me it had been sold. Beatrice's face went pale, then flushed with anger. That thing was a painful reminder of what we lost. I was trying to help you move forward, Theodore. You were drowning in grief, and Matilda was catatonic. Sometimes we have to make hard choices for the people we love. That wasn't your choice to make. Everything in this house is my choice. Beatrice's composure finally cracked. I've held this family together while you fell apart. I've managed the estate, handled the business affairs, raised your daughter when you couldn't bear to look at her. Get out. What? Get out of my study. And start packing your things. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. Beatrice stared at her brother like he'd slapped her. You can't be serious. Theodore, I'm your sister. My sister who threw away my wife's belongings without asking. My sister who fired the one person who's been able to reach my daughter. My sister who's done nothing but try to erase Victoria from this house like she never existed. Theodore stood, and there was steel in his voice that Beatrice hadn't heard in years. I've been sleepwalking through life, letting you make decisions because I was too broken to care. But I'm awake now, and I want you gone. Beatrice's face twisted with something ugly. You'll regret this. That woman, she's using you. Using Matilda. Women like her always have an angle. Out. Now. Beatrice left, but the look she gave Theodore was poison and promise combined. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, Joe and Matilda had developed rituals. Every evening before bed, Joe would play the music box and tell Matilda a story. Sometimes fairy tales, sometimes stories from her own life, sometimes elaborate fantasies she made up on the spot. One night, Joe was telling a story about a princess who lost her voice to an evil witch but learned to speak through music when Matilda suddenly grabbed the whiteboard and wrote, "What happened to my mama?" Joe's hands stilled on the music box. This was dangerous territory. What do you mean, sweetheart? Everyone says car accident. But I remember. She wrote faster now, her letters urgent and messy. We were fighting. Mama and Daddy. She was crying. Then she left. Then ambulance. What happened? Joe's heart began to race. Baby, you were so little. Sometimes memories get confused. I remember, Matilda wrote, underlining it 3 times. And then, nobody tells me truth. Maybe, Joe said carefully, you should ask your daddy about this. These are his memories too, and he deserves to share them with you in his own way. But Matilda shook her head violently and wrote, he cries when I remind him of her. Joe pulled the little girl close. Oh, sweetheart. He cries because he loves her. Because he loves you. Not because you're doing anything wrong. Then why won't he talk to me? Matilda's eyes filled with tears. Why does everyone treat me like I'm glass? Because they're scared, Joe said honestly. They're scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of hurting you. Scared of losing you the way they lost your mama. Matilda leaned against Joe's shoulder, and Joe stroked her hair, singing softly. But her mind was racing. There was something off about the story of Victoria's death. Something that didn't quite add up. A car accident, they said, but Matilda remembered fighting. Remembered her mother crying. What really happened the night Victoria Corleone died? The next morning, Joe did something she knew she probably shouldn't. She asked Bernard about that night. The butler was polishing silver in the dining room when Joe found him. Mr. Capone, can I ask you something? About Mrs. Corleone? Bernard's hands stopped moving, but he didn't look up. The staff doesn't gossip, Miss Goodcat. I'm not asking for gossip. I'm asking because Matilda needs to understand what happened to her mother. She has questions, and I don't have answers. Bernard was quiet for a long moment. Then, it was a Tuesday. Raining. Mrs. Corleone and the master had argued. A terrible fight. I didn't hear the details, but Mrs. Corleone was distraught. She took her car and drove off around 9:30. Less than an hour later, the police called. Her vehicle had gone through the bridge railing on Highway 41. They said she was driving too fast, lost control in the rain. Was anyone else involved? No. Just her. Single vehicle accident. Bernard finally looked at Joe, and his eyes held a warning. But there were always questions. Things that didn't add up. The police closed the case quickly. Too quickly, some said. But Mr. Corleone was too broken to push for more investigation, and Ms. Hawthorne insisted we all move on. Let the dead rest. What kind of things didn't add up? Bernard set down the silver and lowered his voice. Mrs. Corleone was an excellent driver. Cautious even. And she would never have driven recklessly knowing Matilda was alone in the house. Some of the staff whispered about the brake lines, about the angle of the car going off the bridge. But Ms. Hawthorne shut down all such talk. Said conspiracy theories would only hurt the family more. Jo felt ice crystallize in her stomach. You think it wasn't an accident? I think, Bernard said carefully, that this family has secrets. And secrets have a way of eating people alive from the inside. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. And you should be careful, Miss Goodcat. Miss Hawthorne doesn't like people asking questions. That night, Jo couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room, listening to Matilda's soft breathing through the adjoining door, and tried to make sense of the pieces that didn't fit. What if Victoria's death wasn't an accident? What if someone wanted her dead? And if so, why? And who? She was still awake at 2 a.m. when she heard it, footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful, trying not to be heard. Jo slipped out of bed and carefully opened her door a crack. In the dim emergency lighting, she saw a figure moving toward Matilda's room. A figure that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. Jo's heart hammered as she eased into the hallway, following at a distance. The figure stopped at Matilda's door, tried the handle, locked, thank God, and then stood there for a long moment before moving away toward the back stairs. Jo followed, her bare feet silent on marble, until she saw the figure slip into a room in the east wing. After waiting a full minute, Jo crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. Voices. Low and urgent. Too close. She asks too many questions. Then get rid of her. Like you should have done from the beginning. It's not that simple anymore. Theodore has made her untouchable. He's falling for her, the fool. Then we accelerate the timeline. The girl can't be allowed to remember. If she starts talking, if she tells what she saw that night, she won't. She's been silent for 3 years. Why would that change now? Because of that damn music box. I told you to destroy it, not throw it away where someone could find it. That melody is triggering her memories. I can see it in her eyes. Jo's blood ran cold. They were talking about Matilda. About keeping her silent. About that night. These people, whoever they were, knew something about Victoria's death. And they were terrified of Matilda's voice returning. Jo backed away from the door as quietly as she'd come, her mind racing. She had to tell Theodore. Had to warn him. His daughter was in danger, and the threat was coming from inside his own house. But when she turned to head back to her room, she found herself face to face with someone she hadn't expected. Beatrice stood in the hallway, her face illuminated by her phone's glow, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. Eavesdropping, Miss Goodcat? How very unprofessional. Jo's mouth went dry. Had Beatrice been in that room? Was she one of the voices? I heard noises, Jo said carefully. I was checking to make sure everything was secure. How noble. Beatrice stepped closer, and Jo caught the scent of wine on her breath. You know, I've been doing some research on you. Josephine Goodcat. No permanent address. No family. No references that check out beyond a few forged letters. You're very good at being nobody, aren't you? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Beatrice's voice was silk over steel. What's your angle here? Money. You think you can seduce my grief-stricken brother and live happily ever after in this mansion? Women like you have tried before. They all failed. I'm here for Matilda, Jo said firmly. That's all. Liar. Beatrice's face twisted with contempt. Everyone wants something. And I'm going to find out what you're really after. And when I do, I'll make sure you disappear just as quietly as you appeared. She swept past Jo, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and implied threats. Jo stood in the hallway, shaking, knowing she'd just made a powerful enemy. But more than that, she knew she'd stumbled onto something dangerous, something that put Matilda at risk. She returned to her room and locked both doors. Then she pulled out the music box and held it close, as if it could protect them both from whatever darkness lurked in this beautiful mansion. Tomorrow, she would talk to Theodore. Tomorrow, she would tell him everything. But tomorrow would bring revelations neither of them were prepared for. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with storm clouds gathering over the Corleone estate like a bad omen. Jo woke exhausted, having barely slept after her midnight encounter with Beatrice and the terrifying conversation she'd overheard. She needed to tell Theodore everything. But how? How do you tell a man that people in his own household might be conspiring to keep his daughter silent? That his wife's death might not have been an accident? She was still trying to figure out her approach when Matilda burst into her room. Actually burst, with more energy than Joe had ever seen from the quiet child, and shoved her whiteboard into Joe's hands. "Daddy says we're going to the place," Matilda had written in large, urgent letters. "What place, baby?" "The place where Mama died." He wrote the numbers, Highway 41. Joe's stomach dropped. "Why? Why would he take you there?" Matilda flipped the board over. "Because I asked him. I need to remember. I need to know what happened." "Matilda, sweetheart, that's a lot for you too." Matilda grabbed Joe's hand, squeezing hard, and her eyes were fierce and determined. Then she wrote one more thing. "Come with us. Please." How could Joe say no to that? An hour later, Joe found herself in the back of Theodore's Mercedes, sitting beside Matilda while Theodore drove in tense silence. The rain had started, matching Joe's mood, appropriate, since they were driving toward the place where Victoria Corleone had died 3 years ago. "I don't know if this is a good idea," Theodore said quietly, more to himself than to them. The therapists always said not to force her to confront the trauma. But she insisted. "Wrote me a note this morning saying she needed to see it." "Sometimes," Joe said carefully, "we can't heal until we face what hurt us." Theodore's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. He'd been avoiding his own pain for 3 years, just like Matilda had been locked in silence. Maybe they both needed to face the truth. Highway 41 stretched out before them, winding along the coast with rocky cliffs on one side and the churning ocean on the other. It was beautiful and terrifying at once, a road that demanded respect. Theodore slowed as they approached a section where the guardrail looked newer than the rest, shinier. This was the place. He pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. For a long moment, nobody moved. Rain pattered against the windshield, and the ocean crashed against rocks far below. Then Matilda opened her door and stepped out into the rain. "Matilda!" Theodore scrambled out after her, with Joe close behind. But the little girl wasn't running away. She was walking slowly toward the guardrail, her small hand reaching out to touch the metal. Joe and Theodore stood back, watching, as Matilda closed her eyes and let the rain wash over her face. And then she began to remember. It came in flashes, disjointed but powerful. Her mother's face, tear-streaked and terrified as she grabbed her car keys. "I can't do this anymore, Theodore." "I won't." Her father's voice, angry and desperate. "Victoria, wait. Don't leave like this." Watching from her bedroom window as Mama's car tore down the driveway, going too fast, the red taillights disappearing into the rain. The phone ringing hours later. Her father's scream, a sound no child should ever hear. And something else. Something darker. A memory of being held in the hallway outside her parents' bedroom earlier that evening, before the fight. Being held by someone who smelled like sharp perfume. A voice whispering, "Don't worry, little one. After tonight, everything will be better. You'll see." Aunt Beatrice's voice. Matilda's eyes snapped open, and she spun around to face Theodore and Joe. Her face was transformed, not blank anymore, not empty, but alive with realization and horror and rage. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, sound came out. Not words. Not yet. But a raw, primal scream that contained 3 years of locked-away pain, fury, and betrayal. Theodore fell to his knees in the rain, tears streaming down his face. "Matilda. Oh God, Matilda." The little girl ran to him, and they held each other while she screamed and screamed, letting out everything she'd been holding inside. Joe stood there with tears running down her own face, watching this catharsis, this breaking open of everything that had been sealed shut. When Matilda finally stopped screaming, she was hoarse and shaking. But her eyes were different. Clearer. More present. She pulled away from Theodore and looked at Joe. Her mouth moved, working around sounds that felt foreign after so long. And then, in a voice rusty and rough but undeniably real, "Aunt Beatrice." 2 words. The first words she'd spoken in 3 years. And they changed everything. "What about Aunt Beatrice?" Theodore asked, his voice shaking. Matilda struggled with the words, her face frustrated. Speaking was hard. The muscles didn't remember how. But she tried again. As she said that night. "Take your time, baby," Joe encouraged gently. "We're not going anywhere." Matilda took a deep breath and forced the words out, one painful syllable at a time. She said, "After tonight, everything better." "Before." Mama left. Theodore went very still. "Matilda, are you saying Aunt Beatrice said something to you before your mother left that night?" Matilda nodded frantically, then grabbed Joe's phone from her hand and typed in the Notes app, faster than speaking. Aunt B held me in the hallway. Mama and you were fighting in your room. Aunt B said, after tonight, everything will be better. Your mama won't be sad anymore. Don't worry. Then she put me to bed. Then I heard Mama leave. Then she never came back. The color drained from Theodore's face. Oh God. Oh my God. Theodore, what is it? Joe asked. His voice when he spoke was hollow, destroyed. Beatrice wanted me to leave Victoria. Said she was mentally unstable, that she was a bad mother, that she was going to ruin the family's reputation. We fought about it constantly. And that night, the night Victoria died, Beatrice had come to the house for dinner. She and Victoria had argued viciously. About me, about Matilda, about the company. Victoria was crying, saying she couldn't take Beatrice's interference anymore. That's what we were fighting about when... He couldn't finish. But Joe understood. Theodore, she said carefully, you need to call the police. Right now. And tell them what? That my sister said something cryptic to my daughter 3 years ago? That's not evidence. That's... He stopped, his mind clearly racing. The brakes. The police said there might have been something wrong with the brakes, but they couldn't prove it was anything but wear and tear. But what if? What if someone tampered with them? Joe finished. What if Beatrice knew Victoria would leave angry that night? Knew she'd drive fast, drive recklessly. Knew those brakes would fail at exactly the wrong moment on exactly the wrong road. Theodore pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I'm calling Detective Morrison. He worked the original case. If there's any chance at all, that my wife was murdered. While Theodore made the call, Joe knelt beside Matilda and pulled her close. You were so brave, baby. So brave. Your voice came back. Do you understand? You can talk now. Matilda's arms wrapped around Joe's neck, and in that rusty and used voice she whispered, "And Mommy." Joe's heart broke and mended in the same instant. Oh, sweetheart. I'm not. You are, Matilda insisted, pulling back to look at Joe with fierce certainty. Real Mommy gone. But you brought me back. You found me. You're my mommy now. Joe couldn't speak through her tears. She just held this brave, broken, healing child and let herself be claimed by a love she'd never expected to find. Theodore ended his call and turned to them, his face grim. Detective Morrison is meeting us at the station. He says if there's new evidence suggesting foul play, they'll reopen the case. Matilda will need to give a statement. She can barely speak, Joe protested. This is too much. I can, Matilda said, her voice gaining strength. I have to. For Mama. They drove to the police station through the pouring rain, none of them knowing that they were being watched. That someone had followed them to Highway 41 and had heard every word. That even now, a phone call was being made, a plan being set in motion. Beatrice had underestimated the mute little girl and the singing maid. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The police station was cold and impersonal, smelling of bitter coffee and old papers. Detective Richard Morrison, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and tired shoulders, led them to a private interview room. Before we start, Morrison said, looking at Theodore, you need to understand what you're asking for here. If we reopen this case and find evidence of foul play, it's going to tear your family apart. Your sister could go to prison. The media will be relentless. And your daughter, he glanced at Matilda with concern. She'll have to testify. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed? My wife deserves justice, Theodore said firmly. And my daughter deserves the truth. Morrison nodded and turned on a recording device. For the next 2 hours, Matilda struggled through her statement, her voice growing stronger with each word even as tears streamed down her face. She told them about Aunt Beatrice's words, about the fights, about everything she remembered from that terrible night. Joe sat beside her the whole time, holding her hand, being her anchor. When they finally left the station, it was late afternoon, and Theodore's phone was exploding with messages. Word had somehow gotten out that the Corleone family was at the police station. The press was already gathering outside the estate gates. How did they know? Theodore demanded, scrolling through the messages with increasing fury. We've been here less than 3 hours. How? His phone rang. Beatrice's name flashed on the screen. Theodore answered on speaker. What have you done? Me. Beatrice's voice was calm, cold. I should be asking you that question, little brother. I just got a very interesting call from our family attorney. Apparently, you've decided to destroy our family's reputation by making wild accusations based on the confused memories of a traumatized child. Matilda's not confused. She remembered what you said to her. She remembered what she thinks I said. The mind is a tricky thing, Theodore. Especially in children. Especially after trauma. Beatrice's voice hardened. You're making a terrible mistake. Drop this investigation. Come home. We'll sit down and talk like rational adults. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Tell me the truth, Beatrice. Did you kill my wife? The silence on the other end lasted too long. I loved Victoria, Beatrice finally said, but there was something hollow in her voice. I would never have hurt her. You didn't answer my question. Here's what I'll tell you, Theodore. Victoria was unstable. Paranoid. She was convinced people were plotting against her, including me. She was seeing a psychiatrist, taking medication you didn't even know about. She was a danger to herself and to Matilda. I tried to help her, but she wouldn't listen. And yes, we argued that night. Yes, I told Matilda that things would get better. Because I genuinely believed Victoria needed professional help, possibly hospitalization. I never imagined she would drive off in that state. I never wanted her to die. But you're not sorry she's gone, are you? Another loaded pause. No, Beatrice admitted. I'm not. She was dragging you down, Theodore. She was weak and unstable, and she would have destroyed everything our family built. But that doesn't mean I killed her. It means I'm guilty of being relieved when she was finally out of our lives. Theodore's face had gone white with rage. You're a monster. I'm a realist. And you're about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you let emotions cloud your judgment. When you get home, you'll understand. She hung up. That sounded like a threat, Joe said quietly. Theodore was already calling the estate. Mrs. Chin answered on the first ring, her voice panicked. Mr. Corleone. Thank God. You need to come home immediately. Ms. Hawthorne left an hour ago with 2 suitcases and several boxes from the study. She took documents, sir. Financial records, contracts, I don't know what all. Bernard tried to stop her, but she had some men with her. They weren't gentle. Bernard's got a black eye. Call security. Tell them not to let her back on the property. I'm on my way. They raced home, but Theodore knew in his gut they were too late. Beatrice had been planning this. The moment she'd realized Theodore was turning against her, she'd activated whatever contingency plan she'd prepared. When they arrived at the estate, it was chaos. Police were already there, called by Mrs. Chun after Beatrice's goons had assaulted Bernard. The butler sat in the kitchen with an ice pack on his face, giving his statement. Theodore went straight to his study and found his worst fears confirmed. His filing cabinets had been ransacked. His safe stood open and empty. 3 years' worth of financial documents were gone, including, he realized with growing horror, the papers related to Victoria's life insurance, her trust fund, and the company's shares she'd held in her name. She's been embezzling, Theodore said numbly, staring at the empty safe. All this time. That's why she wanted Victoria gone. Not just because she didn't like her, because Victoria had access to the company's financial oversight. She must have discovered Beatrice was stealing from the company. That's why they were fighting. Joe stood in the doorway with Matilda, who looked small and frightened by all the commotion. Theodore, we need to get Matilda somewhere safe. If Beatrice is this desperate. She's right, Detective Morrison said, appearing behind Joe. I've put out a warrant for your sister's arrest, but we haven't located her yet. Until we do, your daughter is a witness to potential murder and fraud. She needs protection. Theodore nodded, his mind racing. I have a safe house. In the mountains. No one knows about it except, he stopped. Except Beatrice. Then somewhere else, Morrison said firmly. Somewhere she can't find you. That's when Joe made a decision that would change everything. I know a place. Everyone turned to look at her. My grandmother's farm, Joe continued. In Georgia. It's been abandoned for years. I inherited it when she died, but I could never afford to fix it up. It's off the grid. No paper trail connecting it to the Corleone name. Beatrice would never think to look there. You'd take us there? Theodore asked. You'd protect us? Joe looked at Matilda, who was watching her with those big hazel eyes, and knew there was only one answer. You're my family now. Of course I'll protect you. Hey friends, if you're on the edge of your seat right now, drop a comment and let me know. Are you Team Joe? Do you think Beatrice really did it? I want to hear your theories. And please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This story's about to get even more intense. They packed quickly, just essentials, and left under cover of darkness while Morrison's team secured the estate. Theodore arranged for Mrs. Chun and Bernard to take paid leave and stay with relatives until the situation was resolved. He couldn't risk anyone else getting hurt because of his family's mess. The drive to Georgia took 14 hours. They drove through the night, taking back roads, stopping only for gas and food. Matilda slept fitfully in the back seat, her head on Joe's lap, occasionally crying out in nightmares. "I'm sorry," Theodore said quietly during one of these episodes, glancing at Joe in the rearview mirror. "I brought this into your life. You didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did Matilda," Joe replied, stroking the sleeping child's hair. "Neither did you really. Family's complicated. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us most." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Joe was quiet for a moment. "I told you I grew up in foster care. What I didn't tell you is why. My mother didn't die naturally. My father killed her. Beat her to death while I hid in a closet and listened to every second of it. I was 5 years old." Theodore's hands tightened on the wheel. "Joe, I'm so. Don't apologize. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. Matilda is going to survive this. She's going to have nightmares and trust issues and moments where the fear tries to swallow her whole. But she'll survive because she has you. Because she has me. Because she's not alone in her trauma. My father went to prison, and I went into the system, and I had no one. But she has us. That makes all the difference." Theodore met her eyes in the mirror, and something passed between them, something deeper than gratitude. Understanding, maybe. Or the beginning of something that neither of them was quite ready to name. They arrived at the farm just before dawn. It was exactly as Joe had described, abandoned, overgrown, isolated. The house was small but structurally sound, and after some work, they managed to get the electricity running and the water pump functioning. For 3 days, they existed in a strange limbo. No phones, too easy to track. No internet. No contact with the outside world except for a single burner phone that Theodore used once daily to check in with Detective Morrison. The news wasn't good. Beatrice had disappeared. The financial investigation had revealed massive fraud. She'd stolen over $30 million from the Corleone Company over the past 5 years. And the mechanics who'd examined Victoria's car from the impound lot found evidence that the brake lines had been deliberately cut. Victoria Corleone had been murdered, and Beatrice was the primary suspect. But she was gone, vanished like smoke, and until she was caught, none of them were safe. On the 4th day, Matilda woke up screaming. Joe rushed to her room and found the little girl sitting bolt upright in bed, tears streaming down her face, voice raw from crying. "She's coming. She's coming here. I saw her. It was just a nightmare, baby." "No." Matilda grabbed Joe's arms with surprising strength. "Not nightmare. I saw her. At the farm. She knows. She knows where we are." Theodore appeared in the doorway. "That's impossible. No one knows about this place." But even as he said it, they all heard it. The sound of a car engine approaching up the long dirt road. Someone had found them, and they had nowhere left to run. Theodore moved fast, his business instincts and protective rage combining into pure action. "Joe, take Matilda to the storm cellar. There's a hidden exit that leads to the woods. If anything happens, if you hear anything that sounds wrong, you run. You hear me? You take my daughter and you run. Theodore, you can't face her alone. I won't let her hurt either of you. Not after everything she's taken from us." His eyes were hard, determined. "Go. Now." Joe grabbed Matilda and ran for the cellar stairs as the car engine grew louder. But halfway down, Matilda stopped, pulling against Joe's hand. "What if she hurts Daddy?" Matilda's voice was clearer now, stronger from days of use. "What if she takes him too? Your father can handle himself, baby." "No," Matilda said with startling authority. "She's smart. She's always been smarter than him. She told me once, when Mama was alive, she said men are easy to manipulate, little Tilda. They think with their pride, not their heads. We can't leave him alone with her." Joe stared at this 9-year-old child who suddenly sounded far older than her years, and made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt absolutely right. "Okay, we stay close enough to help if he needs us. But we stay hidden." "Agreed." Matilda nodded, and together they positioned themselves in the cellar, where they could see up into the kitchen through the gap in the floorboards. Above them, Theodore stood in the farmhouse living room, watching through the window as a black SUV pulled up to the house. But it wasn't Beatrice who got out. It was Detective Morrison. Theodore felt his shoulders sag with relief and opened the door. "Morrison, thank God. You thought it was your sister." Morrison's voice was calm, pleasant even. "Too pleasant. Understandable. But no, Theodore. It's just me. Something in his tone made Theodore's hand freeze on the door. How did you find us? I'm a detective, remember? It's my job to find people. Morrison stepped inside without being invited, closing the door behind him. Nice place. Very isolated. Smart choice, really. If it had been anyone else looking for you, they never would have found it. What's going on, Morrison? The detective's pleasant expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. I need you to call your daughter up here. And that maid of yours. We need to have a conversation. About what? About what happens next. See, your sister made me a very generous offer. Enough money to retire comfortably and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. All I have to do is make sure this investigation goes away, along with the witnesses who can implicate her. Theodore's blood turned to ice. You're working with Beatrice. Not working with her. Working for her. There's a difference. She's paying me to clean up her mess, which includes you, your daughter, and that surprisingly resourceful maid who's currently hiding in your cellar. Morrison pulled out a gun, Theodore's own gun, he realized, from the safe that had been emptied. Call them up. Now. We can do this quick and painless, or we can do it the hard way. Your choice. In the cellar, Jo clapped her hand over Matilda's mouth to muffle her gasp. Her mind raced. Morrison was going to kill them. All of them. And there was nowhere to run. He was blocking the only exit. But Matilda pulled Jo's hand away and whispered so quietly it was barely audible. The music box. We need the music box. What? Baby, this isn't the time. Trust me, Matilda breathed. Please. Something in her eyes made Jo believe. She carefully, silently, reached into her bag where she'd packed their few belongings and pulled out Victoria's music box. Matilda took it, wound it up, and before Jo could stop her, she pushed it across the cellar floor so it emerged at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the kitchen, in clear view of the men above. The melody began to play, sweet and haunting, filling the farmhouse with its ghostly tune. Morrison spun toward the sound, his gun swinging to follow. What the? And that's when Theodore attacked. He wasn't a fighter, had never thrown a punch in his privileged life, but he was a father, and he launched himself at Morrison with desperate fury. They crashed into the kitchen table, the gun skittering across the floor. Jo burst from the cellar with Matilda behind her. Matilda, get the gun! The little girl ran for it while Jo grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the counter, her grandmother's skillet, heavy as a weapon, and swung it with all her strength into Morrison's head just as he was getting the upper hand on Theodore. The detective went down hard and didn't move. For a long moment, the three of them stood there breathing hard, the music box still playing its relentless melody, staring at the unconscious cop on the kitchen floor. Is he dead? Matilda whispered. Theodore checked for a pulse. No, just out cold. But he'll wake up soon, and when he does, he'll be in police custody. The real police. Jo was already pulling out the burner phone. Morrison isn't the only detective in the world, and Beatrice can't have bought them all. We call this in, tell them everything, and we make sure this corrupted cop never has the chance to hurt anyone again. But before she could dial, they heard it again, another car engine. This one they recognized, the distinctive purr of a luxury vehicle. Beatrice had arrived. Theodore moved to the window and felt his stomach drop. His sister emerged from a silver Mercedes, dressed immaculately as always, but there was something wild in her eyes. Desperate. And she wasn't alone. Two large men got out with her. The same men who'd helped her ransack the estate, no doubt. And they were armed. She's not here to talk, Theodore said quietly. Then we fight, Jo replied, and there was steel in her voice. We fight for your daughter, for Victoria's memory, for the truth. Together. Theodore looked at this woman. This stranger who'd walked into their lives just weeks ago and become the foundation that held them together, and realized he'd been falling in love with her without even knowing it. Her strength, her compassion, her fierce protection of his daughter, the way she'd brought music and light back into their darkness. Together, he echoed, taking her hand. Matilda stood between them, the gun, safely on the ground now, forgotten, the music box still singing, and spoke with her mother's determination. She hurt Mama. She won't hurt us. We're family now. And family protects family. Beatrice's voice came from outside, amplified by a megaphone. Theodore, I know you're in there. Come out. Bring the child. We can still fix this. We can still make this go away. Theodore stepped onto the porch, leaving Jo and Matilda inside. It's over, Beatrice. Morrison's unconscious in the kitchen. The police are on their way. You've lost. Have I? Beatrice smiled, and it was terrible to see. I don't think you understand, little brother. I've spent 3 years building contingencies. I have enough money hidden to disappear forever. I have enough evidence planted to make it look like you were the one embezzling. You were the one who killed Victoria. I can destroy you, Theodore. I can take everything. Your company, your reputation, your daughter. Or, her voice softened, became almost reasonable. You can let me go. Tell the police Morrison was working alone. Claim Victoria's death was an accident after all. Withdraw your accusations. And I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Your daughter gets to keep her father. You get to keep your life. Everyone wins. Except Victoria, Theodore said. She doesn't win. She stays dead and unavenged while her killer walks free. Victoria was weak. Beatrice's composure finally cracked. She was going to ruin everything with her snooping and her ethics and her questions. She found the discrepancies in the accounts. She was going to go to the board, to the authorities. She would have destroyed the family name, destroyed the company. I built that company with my own hands while you were off playing house with your pretty wife. She was going to take it all away over some missing money. So yes, I cut her brake lines. Yes, I made sure she'd die that night. And I'd do it again. The words hung in the air like poison, and Beatrice seemed to realize too late that she'd just confessed. Because Matilda had walked out onto the porch holding Joe's phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. Hi, Aunt Beatrice, Matilda said in her rusty but determined voice. Say hi to the police. They've been listening this whole time. Beatrice's face went white, then red with rage. You little. She lunged for the porch, but her men grabbed her arms, holding her back. Not to protect the family, but because the sound of sirens was already approaching, multiple vehicles screaming down the dirt road. Morrison had called for backup before coming to the farm. But he'd called real backup, his partner, the state police, even the FBI. Because Theodore had done something smart. Before going into hiding, he'd sent copies of all the evidence he had, financial records, Matilda's testimony, everything, to multiple law enforcement agencies with instructions to open them if he didn't check in. The contingency plan had worked. Beatrice was surrounded in minutes, her men surrendering without a fight. She stood there in handcuffs, her perfect facade finally, completely shattered, and looked at Theodore with something that might have been regret. Or might have just been anger at being caught. I did it for you, she said. Everything I did for our family. No, Theodore replied. You did it for yourself. You always have. They took her away, and Morrison too, awake now and being read his rights. And suddenly the farmhouse was full of police and FBI agents and people taking statements and photographing evidence. Through it all, Joe held Matilda close, the music box finally silent in the little girl's hands, and watched Theodore give his statement with his head held high. They'd won. They'd survived. But the fight had taken something from all of them. Innocence, maybe, or the last shred of ability to trust easily. Still, as Matilda leaned against Joe and whispered, Mommy, can we go home now? Joe realized they'd gained something too. They'd gained each other. The trial of Beatrice Hawthorne became the media sensation of the decade. A billionaire's sister accused of murdering his wife for financial gain, embezzling millions, and conspiring with a corrupt detective to eliminate witnesses. It had everything the 24-hour news cycle craved. But for the Corleone family, it was simply hell. They'd returned to the estate, but it felt different now, haunted by betrayal, watched by cameras that followed their every move. Reporters camped outside the gates. Every detail of their lives became public consumption. Matilda had to testify. At 9 years old, she sat in a courtroom and told her story to strangers. About the night her mother died, about Aunt Beatrice's whispered promises, about 3 years of silence born from trauma and fear. Joe sat in the gallery every single day, a steady presence that Matilda could look to when the lawyers got too aggressive or the memories got too painful. And every evening, they'd return to the estate, and Joe would play the music box and sing until Matilda could breathe normally again. Theodore watched this ritual with something like awe. Joe had become their anchor, their safe harbor in the storm. She kept the household running when Mrs. Chun was too overwhelmed. She fielded phone calls from reporters with polite but firm refusals. She made sure Matilda ate and slept and laughed despite everything. And somewhere in those long, difficult weeks, Theodore realized he couldn't imagine his life without her. The prosecution's case was airtight. They had Morrison's testimony. He'd turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, detailing how Beatrice had hired him to sabotage the initial investigation into Victoria's death. They had the forensic evidence from the car showing the brake lines had been deliberately cut. They had the financial records proving embezzlement. And most damning of all, they had Beatrice's recorded confession on Joe's phone. But Beatrice's lawyers were expensive and creative. They argued temporary insanity. They claimed Victoria had been emotionally abusive to Beatrice for years. They painted a picture of a devoted sister driven to desperation by an unstable sister-in-law who threatened the family's legacy. Some people believed it. That was the worst part. Watching commentators on television debate whether Beatrice was a cold-blooded killer or a victim of circumstances, as if Victoria's life was just a topic for discussion. "Turn it off," Joe told Theodore one evening when she found him watching the news in his study, his face gray with exhaustion. "You're torturing yourself. They're making my wife sound like a villain. Like she deserved what happened to her." Joe took the remote and clicked off the television. The people who matter know the truth. Victoria was loved. She was a good mother, a good wife. What some talking head on TV thinks doesn't change that. Theodore looked up at her. This woman who'd arrived at his house as hired help and become the person he relied on more than anyone. "How did you get so wise?" "Trauma," Joe said with a sad smile. "Lots and lots of trauma. Builds character, they say. Mostly it just teaches you what's worth caring about and what's just noise." "You're not noise," Theodore said quietly. "You're the clearest signal in my life right now." Something shifted in the air between them. They'd been dancing around it for weeks. This pull, this connection that went deeper than gratitude or circumstance. But the timing was wrong, the situation too complicated, and neither knew how to bridge the gap between what they were and what they might become. The moment broke when Matilda appeared in the doorway, the music box in her hands. "I can't sleep. Will you sing with me?" "Of course, baby." Joe stood, but Theodore caught her hand. "I'll come too. If that's okay." That night, the three of them sat together in Matilda's room. Joe and Matilda on the bed, Theodore in the chair beside it, and they sang together. Theodore's voice was rusty and uncertain, but he remembered the words to the lullaby that Victoria used to sing. And Matilda's voice, growing stronger every day, joined Joe's in harmony. It was the first time in 3 years that music had filled the Corleone house without sadness attached to it. The first time it felt like healing instead of mourning. "We sound like a family," Matilda said when the song ended. She looked between Joe and her father with those two knowing eyes. "We should make it official." "Matilda," Theodore started, but his daughter wasn't finished. "Daddy, I know you love Joe. And Joe loves you, I can tell. And I love both of you. So why are we pretending? Why can't we just be happy?" Out of the mouths of babes, Theodore thought, comes devastating truth. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Joe said gently. "Your father and I love each other," Matilda finished. "That's not complicated. That's the simplest thing in the world. Aunt Beatrice made everything complicated with her lying and stealing and," she struggled with the word, "murdering. But we don't have to be complicated. We can just be a family." Theodore met Joe's eyes across the bed, and he saw his own longing reflected back at him. But he also saw her fear. The fear that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong in his world, that eventually he'd realize he'd made a mistake. "Joe," he said softly, Matilda's right. "I've been a coward, hiding behind propriety and timing and all the excuses people use when they're afraid. But I'm not afraid anymore. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you brought my daughter back to life. I love that you sing constantly and that you eat dessert before dinner and that you cry at sad movies. I love—" "Theodore," Joe interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "I'm a foster kid with no education and a past full of trauma. I can't." "You can," Matilda said firmly. "Because we choose you. We want you. You're already our family. We're just asking you to make it permanent." Joe looked at this child who called her mommy, at this man who'd somehow become her whole heart, and realized they were right. All her reasons for keeping distance were just fear dressed up as logic. "I love you too," she whispered. "Both of you. So much it scares me." "Then be scared with us," Theodore said, standing and moving to sit beside her on the bed. "Be scared and happy and messy and real. Be ours." He pulled a small box from his pocket. He'd been carrying it for days, waiting for the right moment, and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "I know the timing is terrible. I know we're in the middle of a trial and a media circus. I know by every conventional standard, this is too fast, too crazy. But Joe, I also know that life is short and precious and unpredictable. I lost Victoria because I didn't cherish every moment we had. I won't make that mistake twice. Josephine Goodcat, will you marry me? Joe laughed and cried at the same time, pulling both Theodore and Matilda into a hug. Yes. Yes, of course yes. Matilda squealed with delight, and for a moment, the weight of the trial and the pain of the past faded away. There was just this, a broken man, a wounded woman, and a healing child choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their lives. The next day in court, Beatrice took the stand in her own defense. It was a calculated risk by her lawyers. Let the jury see her humanity, let her tell her side of the story. But Beatrice was too angry, too arrogant to play the victim convincingly. When asked about Victoria, she couldn't help but sneer. When questioned about the embezzlement, she justified it as taking what I'd earned. And when the prosecutor asked her directly if she regretted killing Victoria Corleone, she paused just a fraction too long before saying yes. The jury saw through her. Everyone did. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison without possibility of parole, Beatrice's mask finally, completely shattered. She looked at Theodore with naked hatred and screamed, I made you. Everything you have is because of me. You ungrateful. The bailiffs dragged her from the courtroom, still screaming, still unable to accept that she'd lost. Theodore sat perfectly still, his hand in Joe's, and watched his sister disappear. He waited to feel something, grief, relief, anger. But all he felt was tired. So very tired. It's over, Joe whispered. It's over, he echoed. Outside the courthouse, they faced the barrage of reporters one last time. Theodore read a brief statement about justice being served and his family's need for privacy to heal. He thanked the prosecution team, the jury, and the real police who'd helped bring his sister to justice. And then he did something unexpected. He pulled Joe close and kissed her in front of all those cameras, making a statement that needed no words. This woman is mine. This is my family. And I'm done hiding. The cameras went crazy, but Theodore and Joe just smiled. Because they'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just noise. Hey beautiful people, if this story is hitting you right in the feels, do me a favor and hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you think happens next. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? There's so much more to come. 6 months later, the Corleone estate had transformed into something Victoria would have loved. A home full of music and laughter and life. Joe had moved into the master bedroom, at Theodore's insistence and Matilda's delighted urging. They'd redecorated together, keeping the pieces that Victoria had loved, but adding new colors, new art, new memories. The covered pianos had been uncovered and tuned. Music filled the house again, not as a ghost of the past, but as a celebration of the present. Matilda was thriving. Her voice grew stronger every day, and she'd started taking singing lessons. A natural talent inherited from her mother and nurtured by Joe. She'd also started therapy to process everything she'd experienced, and while there were still hard days, they were becoming fewer. She called Joe Mommy, without hesitation now, and Joe had legally adopted her the month before. Matilda Chun Goodcat Corleone, a name that honored all the women who'd shaped her life. The wedding had been small and private, held in the estate's garden on a perfect spring day. Just family and close friends, no media, no spectacle. Mrs. Chun had cried through the entire ceremony. Bernard had served as Theodore's best man and had even smiled, which Joe considered a minor miracle. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Matilda had shouted, "No way," with such fierce joy that everyone laughed, and the moment became one of their favorite memories. Now Joe stood in the kitchen making dinner. Actual dinner, not catered by staff, while Matilda did homework at the counter and Theodore went through mail at the table. It was domestic and mundane and absolutely perfect. "There's a letter here from the district attorney," Theodore said, opening an official-looking envelope. He read silently for a moment, then smiled. "They've recovered most of the money Beatrice stole. After legal fees and restitution, we should get about $23 million back." "That's good," Joe said, stirring pasta sauce. "What should we do with it?" Theodore asked, and Joe loved that he said we, that he treated her as an equal partner in every decision. Matilda looked up from her math homework. "I think we should help kids like Mommy Joe was. Foster kids. Give them music lessons and college money and safe places to live." Joe's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, that's a beautiful idea. The Victoria Corleone Foundation for Foster Youth, Theodore said, testing the name. My wife would have loved that. Both of my wives. He caught Joe's eye and grinned, and she threw a dish towel at him, laughing. I'm serious, though, Matilda continued, warming to her theme. We have so much, and some kids have nothing. We could make a real difference. We could save people like you saved me. Joe crossed to Matilda and pulled her into a hug. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Matilda said, squeezing her tight. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime rituals, Joe and Theodore sat together on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the estate grounds. The music box sat on the table between them, silent now but always close. Do you ever think about Victoria? Joe asked quietly. Does it feel strange that I'm here? Theodore took her hand. I think about her every day. But no, it doesn't feel strange. I think she'd be happy for us. Happy that Matilda has a mother who loves her. Happy that I found someone who makes me want to be better. Victoria believed in second chances, in choosing joy even after tragedy. This, us, would have made her smile. I hope so, Joe said. I wish I'd known her. You do know her. She's in Matilda's smile, in the music that fills this house, in the values she instilled before she died. She's not gone, Joe. She's just changed shape, became part of the foundation we're building on. Joe leaned her head on Theodore's shoulder and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. She'd spent so much of her life feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, like she was always just visiting other people's lives. But this was home. Not the mansion or the money or the privilege, but the people. The love. The choice to build something beautiful from broken pieces. I got something for you, Theodore said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Well, for us really. For the family. Joe unwrapped it carefully and found a leather journal, expensive and beautiful, with the Goodcat Corleone family story embossed on the cover. I thought we could document this, Theodore explained. Not for anyone else, just for us. Our story. How we came together, how we healed, how we built this family. So that someday, when Matilda has children of her own, she can show them. So they'll know that even after the darkest times, there's hope. There's healing. There's love. Joe opened the journal and saw that Theodore had already written the first entry, dated the day Joe had arrived at the estate. Today, a stranger walked into our lives. We didn't know it yet, but she would save us. This is the story of how we saved each other. Joe's tears fell on the page, and Theodore gently wiped them away. Happy tears, I hope? The happiest, Joe confirmed. Then she picked up the pen and added to the entry. This is the story of a little girl who lost her voice and found it again. Of a man who lost his wife and learned to love again. Of a woman who had no family and found everything. This is the story of the music box that connected us all, a gift from the past that gave us our future. She set down the pen and kissed her husband, deeply and sweetly, while somewhere in the house, Matilda practiced her scales, her voice pure and strong and full of promise. The next morning, they held the first official meeting of the Victoria Corleone Foundation. Mrs. Chun had helped organize it. Bernard had prepared the conference room, grumbling the whole time but secretly pleased. And Matilda had created a presentation about what services foster kids needed most. Music therapy, Matilda explained to the assembled board, which consisted of Theodore, Joe, 3 social workers, and a child psychologist they'd hired. Music saved Mommy Joe when she was little. Music saved me. We should give every foster kid the chance to find their voice, whether that's through singing or instruments or just having someone sing them to sleep. The board approved the proposal unanimously. Over the following months, the foundation grew. They partnered with foster agencies across 3 states. They funded music programs, provided scholarships, and created safe houses for teens aging out of the system. Joe personally oversaw much of it, using her own experiences to shape programs that actually helped rather than just looking good on paper. Theodore reduced his role at the company, promoting from within and delegating more. His priorities had shifted. The business would always be important, but his family came first now. Always. 1 year to the day after Beatrice's conviction, they held a memorial service for Victoria. Not a sad affair, but a celebration. They invited everyone who'd loved her, decorated the estate with her favorite flowers, and played recordings of her piano performances. Matilda sang a song she'd written for her mother, about love that transcends death, about grief that transforms into gratitude, about the space in our hearts where lost people live forever. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Afterward, Joe found Theodore standing alone by Victoria's portrait in the main hall. A A painting of her at the piano, caught mid-laugh, her beauty and joy perfectly captured. "Thank you," Theodore said softly, not taking his eyes off his first wife's face. "For what?" Joe asked. "For not asking me to forget her. For including her in our lives, in our family. For teaching Matilda that she can love us both, that loving a new mother doesn't diminish the one she lost. She'll always be Matilda's first mother," Joe said simply. "I'm just grateful I get to be her second one. There's room in that child's heart for both of us." Theodore finally turned to look at Joe, his second wife, his second chance, his proof that life continues even after tragedy. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "We're all lucky," Joe corrected. "Because we found each other. Because we chose each other. Because we built this." She gestured at the house full of people celebrating Victoria's memory. Together. That night, the three of them did what had become their favorite ritual. They sat together in Matilda's room, the music box playing its sweet melody, and took turns adding to the family journal. Theodore wrote about the foundation's success, about how proud he was of both his girls. Matilda wrote about her upcoming performance in the school musical, about her new best friend, about feeling happy again. And Joe wrote, "1 year ago, I was nobody, a foster kid with no family and no future. Today, I'm a wife, a mother, a foundation director, and most importantly, I'm home. Not because of money or mansions, but because I found people who chose me, who loved me not despite my broken pieces, but because they had broken pieces too, and together we made something whole. Victoria's music box brought us together, but it's our love that keeps us strong. Every night when I win that little key and hear that melody, I think of her, the woman I never met but who gave me everything. She gave me Theodore and Matilda. She gave me a family. She gave me a home. This is what second chances look like. This is what healing looks like. This is what love looks like, messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. We're the Good Cat Corleone family, and this is our happily ever after." Joe closed the journal and looked at her family, her daughter curled against her side, her husband's arm around them both, the music box singing its eternal song of hope and healing. Outside, the sun was setting over the Corleone estate, painting everything gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new moments of joy and sorrow mixed together like all real life is. But tonight they had this, a family born from tragedy, strengthened by love, and bound together by music, memory, and the unbreakable choice to keep choosing each other. Every single day, the music box wound down, its final notes drifting through the room like a blessing. Theodore reached out and wound it again, because some songs deserve to play forever. And in that moment, in that room, with those people, everything was exactly as it should be. Perfect? No, but perfectly theirs. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey, beautiful souls. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances and the healing power of love, please share it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Subscribe if you haven't already. We have so many more stories to explore together. Remember, no matter what darkness you're walking through, there's always hope. There's always healing. There's always the possibility of a new song beginning. Until next time, keep believing in your happily ever after. Love.